Hello, I'm Carol Williams, coordinator of the Resilience Coordinated Agricultural Project, a research, outreach, and education project at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, funded by the U.S. Department of Agriculture. And welcome to this webinar, the first in a series offered for farmers and service professionals to share information and insights that help farmers achieve greater agricultural resilience to weather extremes and market fluctuations. When farmers succeed and they and their families thrive, we all benefit. Our goal is to serve the interests of farmers and society. Joining us for our first webinar is Dr. Valentine Picasso, professor of plant and agroecosystem sciences at the University of Wisconsin-Madison and director of the Resilience Coordinated Agricultural Project, or simply the RCAP. Dr. Picasso is a forages and livestock grazing system specialist, and he's part of a multi-university team investigating the perennial wheatgrass called Kernza as a dual-purpose grain crop for grain and forage. You can find out more about the RCAP by visiting agresilience.org or our Facebook group, Ag Resilience. Details on these social media, our funding, and resources about today's webinar are in the notes below. Dr. Picasso, welcome.
Thank you, Carol. It's great to be here.
Well, today we'd like to talk about agricultural resilience just more generally. What it is, why it matters, and what farmers can do to improve the resilience of their farms. So, what is agricultural resilience?
Yeah, that is a great question. So, agricultural resilience has to do with the ability of farmers to resist and recover from a crisis that can be like a big drought or a flood or a market crisis where the prices go up or down. And so the question of what is resilience is what does it mean to resist and withstand a crisis like that? Imagine, for instance, I'm going to share here some slides. Imagine, for instance, that we have a corn crop that has this very dry year, and there's a drought in the region, and we really cannot harvest, or we have very low yields. That is a big problem for farmers and for everyone. And so what we are about is trying to figure out what makes an agricultural system more resilient, more able to withstand a drought. One of the things that we think it's very much associated with a more resilient system is having, like you see in this picture, perennial forages. Perennial forages like alfalfa or grasses are very good at tolerating a drought, for instance, or a flood. And so that brings to the farm more resilience.
Great, that makes total sense. And so, related to this idea of resilience and being able to withstand or resist extremes, many of us as, well, farmers and non-farmers alike, we're taught as school children about the historical developments of agriculture, new crops, new ways of doing things. And some of us probably learned about crop rotations and using different crops in the same location over time, usually one year to the next. And this does a couple of things: protects soil fertility and it discourages crop pests and disease. So, what can you tell us about crop diversity, why it's important in the context of modern agriculture, and how that fits with resilience?
Excellent. Yes, crop diversity is very important to promote resilience. Um, Again, I'm going to share another slide here. When we think about the agricultural systems, we think about different types of crops and different types of production systems. When we include pastures or forage mixtures or crop rotations that have grain crops, but also forage crops or living mulches. These are all examples of diverse systems that are that have many different species. If you think of a pasture, for instance, there's a lot of different grasses and forbs and legumes in that in that land, or a forage mixtures that has legumes and multiple grasses species. More species means more diversity. And so when we have more species, we have a diverse system. Crop rotations that have more than two crops, like corn, soybeans, and alfalfa, or adding oats and small grains, or different types of crops, are a good example of adding diversity to our farm. Also, intercropping or relay cropping or living mulches are another example where we add more diversity in the same field. We might have different rows of different crops, or even strips of different crops. Grass legume pastures are probably the most extended, diverse land use, where we have multiple species in the same field. And all of these have benefits in terms of improving, if we have livestock, having diverse forages improves the diets of the animals, increases forage yields, and also buffers the variability, the seasonal forage availability. In a way, is the importance of diversity has to do with this very well-known saying that we shouldn't put all the eggs in the same basket, right? When you have different crops that are adapted to different problems, we can actually diversify the risk and reduce the risk, and therefore being more resilient as a farm.
Okay, so you're saying that with more different crops side by side, or in rows, or mixed all together in a pasture, that they each have a different way of adapting or adjusting to conditions, and that when we don't rely on just a single crop, then we increase the ability of the field to adjust to whatever might come down the road weather-wise.
Exactly, because we never know what is going to come, right? I mean, might be a drought, might be a flood, might be a year that we have very high temperatures, or a very cold winter, or a winter that there's no snow, or I mean, like, and all those different climatic extremes might affect different crop species. And so there might be one species that's more adapted to drought, and there might be other species that are more resistant to cold weather. And by having many different species together, we reduce the risk and we're more resilient.
Makes sense. Um, okay, so also related to resilience, we talk about, and you've mentioned it, perennial crops. Now, most farmers and probably many folks just in the general public, particularly those who garden, will understand what is a perennial plant or a perennial crop. But for some folks who might not be so familiar, and there may be farmers that really have not ever considered perennial crops, so could you explain a little bit about how perennial crops differ from, say, annual crops? And specifically the role of perennial crops in improving resilience.
Well, absolutely. So perennial crops are plants that live more than 2 years. So we plant them or seed them, and then they grow 1 year, and then regrow the next year, and regrow the next year. And we can have multiple harvests of this same crop over multiple years. The most common example are the forage perennial crops like alfalfa or like perennial grasses, which we plant them and they regrow year after year, and we harvest them multiple times during the year and multiple years. The most important things of perennial crops, though, it's not what we see above ground, is what exists below ground. And that's why we have here some pictures of the roots of some of these perennial crops. The living roots and the cover of these perennials, it's very important. On the left there, we have a picture of intermediate wheatgrass, which is a perennial grass that is used for forage, but also can be harvested for grain. So it's a dual use crop. And you can see the root systems that are very dense, very deep. And those deep root systems, on the one hand, build soil and retain nutrients and promote a healthy soil. But at the same time, they provide resilience to drought, of course, and increase the infiltration of water in the soil. Also, we have here a picture of an alfalfa plant that has some very also thick and deep tap roots that provide alfalfa with the benefit of being very drought tolerant too. So perennial crops that have deep root systems can help protect the soil, reduce soil erosion, sequester carbon in the soil, and also reduce the need for fertilizer for that crop and for the subsequent crop in the rotation. That's why perennials are so important and so promoters of resilience.
Mm. So, I mean, this makes sense that roots in the ground for an entire year or over multiple years help protect the soil, help with the crop to get to water at greater and greater depths. But how does perennial crops or perenniality of a crop fit with diversity?
Well, perennial crops are a great example of species that can help diversify our agricultural systems. Um, Depending on the region that we are, we might have farms that are mainly one or two crops, maybe corn or soybean or wheat. And by adding perennial crops like alfalfa or forages, we add both diversity because we add a new species or several new species, which adds diversity, and perenniality because we add crops that have continuous living cover and deep roots and can live year after year. So perenniality and diversity are very much associated. And so it is a great way to diversify a farm to add perennials.
So that would be true even if adding perennials, a single perennial crop, say to just one field or just part of a field, because then we're talking about diversity of crops at the farm level.
Absolutely. Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Makes sense. Well, okay, so one of the next things we wanted to explore today is about the importance of soil nutrients. So, all farmers, whether they grow annual crops or not, if they grow perennial crops, they understand the importance of soil nutrients for the crops to grow and mature, and to yields. Some of these nutrients seem to stay in the soil and sort of cycle between the crop and the soil itself throughout the year or year to year, but other times nutrients move out of the soil or away from the field where they can become pollution in groundwater if deep below the field, or runoff. We say precipitation makes that water flow to a nearby stream. And in the case of managing soil nutrients, particularly for annual row crops, farmers need to purchase and apply these soil nutrients every year, like nitrogen, for example. So there's a lot of talk about closing the nutrient loop, and that this will do many things, including improve agricultural resilience. So could you talk to us a little bit about that, closing that loop, and the idea of circular systems of cycling nutrients?
Yes, absolutely. So circular systems, as you're describing, are systems that help with recycling those nutrients within the farm. Okay, that is very important. And the point here is when we have an annual crop like corn, for instance, um, we need to apply fertilizer to provide the nutrients that crop requires. But because it's an annual crop and there is a time of the year that it's not covering the ground, um, it's going to be when it rains and there's no crop, either at the early stages of the spring, right? In the early spring when the crop hasn't covered the soil yet, or after the harvest when the soil is bare again. When it rains, when the wind blows, there's going to be soil erosion, okay? And those nutrients that are in the soil are going to be washed away with the soil erosion, and they are going to end up in the rivers, in the lakes, in the water, and they're going to be a loss of nutrients for the farm and a source of pollution down in the water. And so what we want is farming systems that close that loop, that actually recycle the nutrients. The first thing is having perennials that can cover the ground continuously. So there's a reduction in soil erosion and the nutrients are hold in the soil year round. The other thing we really need is legumes. Legumes like alfalfa or soybeans are examples of crops that can actually fix nitrogen from the air. So they provide fertilizer for free, basically. They have an association with microbia in the soil that allows them to take nitrogen from the atmosphere and turn it into fertilizer in the soil. So having nutrients is a way of recycling that nitrogen. Having legumes is a way of recycling that nitrogen from the air to the soil. And the other important thing is having livestock. Livestock is another, especially grazing livestock. It's very important for recycling the nutrients because those nutrients that are in the crops go to the livestock and that get recycled via urine and manure. And so systems that actually close that loop of nitrogen and other nutrients are really important for agricultural resilience. They save costs for farmers because we reduce the need for fertilizers, and they protect the environment because they protect soil health and reduce water pollution down the stream.
Got it. So, crop diversity, uh, perennials, or crops that live 2 years or more, the recycling of nutrients in place. This is not a question that I had prepared ahead of time, but it strikes me that these are approaches or these sorts of systems sound like very old systems, traditional, like from indigenous cultures. Is this true?
Well, I mean, the principles of using diversity and perenniality and circularity, yes, as you say, are very old, and we have learned this from indigenous communities, but also from traditional farmers from many parts of the world throughout the ages. The thing is that with the modern agricultural systems, we've been focused and I would say obsessed with specialization and simplification and growing one crop very well. And we forgot that really having diversity, perenniality, circularity, and systems that are integrated, it's very, very important for the economics and for the environment too. So yes, we need to go back to these systems that with the knowledge that came from many generations before of us.
Right, right. Well, okay, so this all sounds wonderful, and it would seem sort of a natural that more farmers than currently do would be using these sorts of approaches to their farms. I mean, makes sense. Save soil, save money, have less vulnerability to extremes of weather and market fluctuations. Um, and I guess in some cases, actually, farmers um, experience ruin. They have to leave the farmer. They have to leave farming, which doesn't sound really good for all of us. We need the food, feed, fiber, and fuel, right? Especially in a global, a human population is expanding. We will need food, feed, fiber, and fuel for decades and decades to come. And so maybe you could just give us a little bit more insight into the fact that, well, these are sort of it's old systems, it's old knowledge, but we have new, modern agriculture. And so what are some of, maybe we should flip this on its head and say, well, so why aren't more farmers able to adopt some or all these practices, particularly in, modern large scale farming?
Yeah, that is a good question. And it all comes down to economics and policy, I would say. Um, the um, the current policies in place and the current structure of the markets that we have really promote specialization and just focusing on just one crop. We all the benefits that diverse systems have been in a way changed by the subsidies and the insurance system that protect the farmers when all these problems happen, right? And so instead of using diversity of crops for buffering the risk of a drought or a flood, we have policies that kind of save the farmers when a drought comes or when a flood comes or any other disaster, which is good that we have those things, but the policies don't really help to promote diversification. So we really need other types of policies that protect the environment and the people by encouraging diversification of crops, by encouraging perennialization, by encouraging integration of legumes and livestock in the systems, so that the system itself can be resilient, and that is a much bigger problem. Is how do we address this big economic and policy changes that are needed to have a more sustainable and resilient farming systems.
Right. So it sounds like um, policies support very specific programs, say at government agency level, programs that are designed to address the more specific and special needs of, say, a corn farmer who experiences floods. So therefore, there is like an insurance assistance or something else to help just corn farmers experiencing floods. That there aren't more general sorts of policies and programs for farmers who do something else.
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly. And that's why we really need, if we want to have more resilience in the farming systems, we need to address changes in policies that promote diversity and perenniality at the local level, at the state level, and also at the federal level.
Right, right. And we just want to say we love our corn farmers. We love our soybean farmers. We love everybody who's farming. And so we're only in our webinar today, we're just focusing on some other things that farms and farmers can do, and that all farmers, no matter what their main or primary crop or livestock are, can do to improve their agricultural resilience.